the same question goes to you.
All
And
right.
you have your family audience here, so you got it. No, but, and particularly when you're thinking about the definition of environmental justice, one of the things that I find often, one of the things when I started looking at Headwaters, sometimes we use words, it's kind of almost, we use jargon as shorthand, so because there's a common understanding, but I don't necessarily know if there is a common one. So if there's ways we can break down even some of these words in kind of their element pieces a little bit. So what do we mean by social justice and environmental racism and those sort of things? Just in kind of everyday speak. You see, I totally did. I'll just throw this away right now.
Sure, sounds good. Well, hi everyone. It's great to be here. My name is Shalini Gupta. I'm with the Center for Earth, Energy, and Democracy at IETP, and our focus is research and policy advocacy that focuses on low income and communities of color who have been disproportionately burdened by by development in the U.S. So our focus regionally is in the Midwest, and our issues that we focus on are on energy, climate, and community development. So that's where my history and background comes into. I historically have been an energy and policy person, and actually came out of the traditional. I had a very different sort of move into this world. I came through a lot of the mainstream environmental organizations, and now reflecting back on that experience, I made my move to environmental justice, sort of how it's termed today, because I knew there was something lacking, and really targeting back to my own experiences as an immigrant to this country. My family, hey Kali. My family, in large part, lives in New Delhi in India, and I spent my first 8 years in Bombay. And New Delhi is one of the most polluted points on the planet. So when I go back and visit, you can't even, when you look up, you can't even really tell if you can see the sun at certain times because it's so hazy with development. And just seeing how the development patterns that we have had here in the United States and are now imposing on other countries, and that these development patterns are moving forward. And the way I came to what I guess we call environmental justice today is really from a development frame or experiences of looking at development. And being here in the United States, looking at the benefits we have in terms of clean air and what that was built on too. If you think about the development in this country over the past 200-300 years since the Industrial Revolution. So a lot of EJ groups look at environmental issues from a really long time horizon. It did not start in the 1960s, 70s. It started, some would say in 1492. And it's really been a long-term horizon. And so since a lot of the indigenous groups we work with, indigenous peoples that Cecilia Martinez, who is also part of the center, works really closely with, they're, I would say, the first environmentalists or environmental justice activists in the Americas, because they were dealing with issues of land appropriation, issues of felling of forests, and a real attack on their culture. And so that's one way to think about environmental justice and the impact that's had on those communities over a long period of time. And then since the Industrial Revolution, to get to our level of sort of development today, it was sort of in the making for the past 200 years in terms of how much energy we need to extract the resources for the steel for our buildings and our bridges and our infrastructure. And really thinking back to whose land was those resources taken from, where were where were these energy facilities, where were they sited? There's some pictures of Pittsburgh in the height of the Industrial Revolution where you look at them and I ask groups, I think I asked one of your classes, right, like what time of day is it? And it's pitch black and the lights are on. It's noon. That's the thinking about what as we've developed through throughout the past 200 years and what resources have gone into that development and who has been involved through each process and impacted, who has benefited and who has been kind of, I would say, on the other side of the coin of that development. Here in the US, historically, and then now that we start to look at it unfold internationally, is a really big issue. You know, people, what I keep hearing in my experiences like here is, oh, look at India and China, right? Like how much they're developing. And you know, when you look at India has I think a 12% growth rate, and with the economic downturn recently, the global economic downturn, it went down to 7% growth rate, which is still incredibly fast. And in order to fuel that growth, you have immense use of resources, immense use of energy to fuel that development that's happening in that country as well. And so you're seeing the same inequities that happened here in the US historically also happen in India as well and other places. So you're seeing appropriation of land, impact to indigenous communities, you're seeing you know, high level of pollution, toxic contamination from extraction, all the same issues are playing out and resulting in inequities as well. So that's how I look at sort of historic environmental justice. I'll quickly speak to some of the work we do in terms of looking ahead. A lot of the work we also do around environmental justice is with the green movement. You know, there's the green movement is, I wouldn't say hit total mainstream, but I think has gotten a lot more support now. You have the Obama administration putting a lot of effort into sustainable communities. You're starting to get a lot of development dollars directed towards green development. So a lot of the things we look at is really putting the racial and economic equity to green economic development, green development. We do that because it's important to remember that a lot of the infrastructure that was put in place, for example, in Minneapolis, was, let's say, about 50 years ago. Like the highway system was built, the transportation infrastructure, a lot of the coal, like the energy infrastructure that we rely on for our lights was built 50 years ago. And a lot of our housing, right, post World War II, you had a big boom in the housing sector, right? And that was also 50 years ago. So 50 years ago, we lived in a largely segregated society. There was a lot of racial discrimination involved. And it's important to remember that that infrastructure was built during a time when a lot of our leadership and people in charge in policy still were under a mindset of, you know, pre-civil rights, or that was just kind of coming up. And so as we're moving towards, you know, there's huge amounts of investment going towards, yes, our roads and bridges, but also things like light rail for green development, for sort of reconfiguring, making our housing more efficient, and also with just other land use considerations. But as we move forward with that, it's important to remember that when they were originally built, they were built at a time of inequity. And so unless we're kind of intentional about dismantling some of that moving forward in these infrastructure projects, we threaten to entrench those inequities even further and potentially even exacerbate them. For example, you can see with light rail as it comes in, if you don't actually start to look at policies to address the inequities, a lot of these smart growth policies have resulted in issues of gentrification and really, you know, exacerbated the, which means that people who are living in these communities right now are forced out because of higher rise in land prices. And these are the same communities. I can be specific, I guess. I'm starting to talk in generalities. But for example, in the Rondo neighborhood, there's some great work happening, working on the light rail line there. You know, they're emblematic of a community that in the 50s and 60s, a lot of resources were taken out of urban neighborhoods. And so the Black community was left there. And now that more green investment is coming in, it's expected that property values will rise around the light rail line, and now they might get pushed out over time again. So sort of furthering the inequities. So that's how I see environmental justice, and looking historically as well as moving ahead.